Well, good morning everyone and welcome to the Environment Infrastructure Committee on Wednesday the 19th of May. I want to say a special welcome to new Councillor Frank Smith, who's joining us for his first meeting, and I wish him good luck in his time at the Council. Can I ask, as we've already been advised, of yours to keep your microphones on to mute unless you're making a contribution to the meeting, and that will hopefully avoid some feedback. Can I also ask you to use the chat function if you want to either ask a question, make a comment, or declare an interest, or propose an amendment to anything we're talking about today. And it's the first meeting for quite some time, so I'm glad to see you all back again. Can I ask Kirsten to do a roll call and deal with any apologies that we may have?
Yes, Convener, we have an apology from Councillor Williamson with Councillor Mccall substituting. Good morning, members. When I call out your name, if you could please confirm that you are present. Convener, we've already heard from yourself. Councillor Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Baird.
Present.
Councillor Barnacle.
Present.
Councillor Donaldson.
Present.
Councillor Duff.
Present.
Councillor Gray, but I don't think we have him in yet. Councillor Jarvis.
Here.
Councillor Lane.
Present.
Councillor McCall.
Present.
Councillor McCall.
Present.
Councillor Parrott.
Present.
Councillor Robertson.
Present.
Councillor Simpson.
Present.
And Councillor Smith.
Present.
Thank you. I think all members are present, Convener, apart from Councillor Gray, who hopefully we can get in soon.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Hopefully Councillor Gray will be able to join us shortly. Before we move on to declarations of interest, I've had a late request from Councillor Stewart to address the committee for 5 minutes just prior to the item which relates to his ward on Scone. These are the last two items. As part of standing orders, I need to ask committee's approval for Councillor Stewart to address us at the appropriate moment. So can I ask if we are in agreement to allow that to happen, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, I'm not sensing anybody disagrees, so we'll allow that, and someone will contact Councillor Stewart at the appropriate moment. Can I ask members if there are any declarations of interest on any of the business that we're talking about today? And I'll just wait for a second to see if there's anything appears in the chat box. Okay, I'm guessing there are no declarations of interest on anything today, so that takes us on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Very conscious this was quite some time ago, but hopefully we can dig into the depths of our memories, and I'll ask if anyone has any issues or any corrections to make to the minute of our previous meeting. And again, I'll wait for a few seconds to see if anything appears in the chat box. Okay, I'm guessing everyone is happy with the minute, in which case I'm not sure how we do the signing, but we'll work that out at some other point in the future. So that takes us on to item 4 of our agenda today, and this is the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act. And I'm going to now pass over to Peter Dixon, who will introduce the report, and then we'll open up to questions at that point. Peter, can I ask you to introduce the report for us, please?
Yes, good morning. Thanks, Convener. This is the second cycle of flood risk management plans that we're here to discuss. So the Council's duties with regard to flooding are set out under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009. The Council published its first local flood risk management plans in June 2016, and we've been moving forward with the implementation of the actions set out in those plans. This was followed up with the publication of an interim progress report in March 2019. Now this forms part of a long-term national programme of work to manage flood risk across Scotland. Flood risk management is carried out in 6-year cycles, and we're now approaching the end of the first cycle, which extends from 2016 to 2022. And the process of reviewing and updating our local flood risk management plans commenced some time ago in anticipation of the start of the second cycle in 2022. Now, as we're all aware, in the meantime, we had an intense storm on the 12th of August 2020, which led to severe flooding in many of our communities, including Perth, Alyth, Dunning, Forgandenny, Kinross and others. And as a result, on the 19th of August last year, committee approved an emergency motion. So this committee report provides an initial response to that motion, and a further report to be submitted to the next committee meeting will address the remainder of the motion, and will also present a report to the on the Council's response to the flooding of last August. So back to today, the Environment and Infrastructure Committee has been asked to consider Report 2160, which now provides an update on the progress towards the publication of the second cycle of SEPA's flood risk management strategies in December 21 and the Council's local flood risk management plans in June 2022. It seeks the committee's approval of the key information in the draft strategies and plans. So within the report, the key information that makes up the Council's input to this process is set out. This has been based on the second National Flood Risk Assessment, which led to some changes in the areas designated as being at high risk of flooding. And those are known as potentially vulnerable areas, or PVAs, and the introduction of new objective target areas. And the factual descriptions of our hydrological catchments and the existing flood risk, which is known as the characterisation information, is already publicly available to view online. And the committee report now sets out the objectives for managing that identified flood risk and the selected actions to be taken forward by the Council to achieve those objectives. So the committee has been asked to agree those objectives and the general and specific actions that have been selected, which include flood protection schemes and works, flood studies and steps to manage surface water flooding. This information is then to be put to public consultation for a 3-month period before the strategies and plans are published. And can members please note that SEPA have now indicated that the public consultation will commence on a revised date of 30th of July 2021 and not in June 2021 as noted in the report. This is later than originally anticipated due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the severe flooding in August last year and the December 2020 cyber attack on SEPA's IT systems. And the public consultation arrangements are set out in the report. Thereafter, there will be a national prioritisation exercise which will inform the allocation of national funding before the publication of the final strategies and plans. So just to sum up, this is a long-term approach based on tackling the areas of highest flood risk. As a council, we're expected to take a proactive role in managing and with achievable lowering the overall flood risk in our local area. It's important to note that this committee report is part of a scheduled and legally required review and does not prevent the council from responding to flooding incidents as and when they arise. Indeed, the strategies and plans that are coming up also include the necessary actions that allow the council to respond to flooding in the short and medium term as well as in the long term. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for that introduction. I'll open up for questions in the usual manner. If anyone has a question, could you pop Q in the chat box? I'll take them in the order they appear. Okay. My ear is full of beeps, so let's go with first question to Councillor Barnacle, please.
Thanks, convener. Morning, Peter. My question, which you'll probably be familiar with, relates to areas that one may feel are flood risk areas through experience, but are not part of SEPA's PVAs or OTAs. Does the council have any influence on those, on the setting of those areas with SEPA, or are they basically SEPA's decision? And in terms of, I note in paragraph 210, it talks about actions in PVAs, including, for example, watercourse clearance. Well, the area I'm concerned about is Drum, which has a very high water table and has real serious issues with watercourse clearance. And I've been looking for ways of dealing with that. Now, that is not in any of these areas. Is it the consultation that you referred to where I make representation on that? Or do the council in fact have some locus to do that also? That's my question.
Thanks, Councillor Barnacle. Yes, the first part of the question relates to the setting of the potential vulnerable areas. So that really comes out of the National Flood Risk Assessment, which gets done every 6 years by SEPA, it's led by SEPA. We get the information on that. So it's basically based on the science and the evidence base at that point. So we provided whatever information we have to SEPA in terms of records of flooding, for one thing, any sort of flood studies and things that we've got, which give us a better handle on the flood risk in the area. But SEPA do a national exercise, national sort of modelling exercise to come up with these areas and then report, where the greatest concentrations of flood risk are in terms of homes and businesses that are at risk. So that was kind of set back in 2018, and there was a national consultation on that at the time. So yeah, it is led by SEPA, but we do get a chance to comment on that, which we did back then. And to be honest, the PVAs that we have, there's some slight changes, but they are generally the same as they were since 2012, really. But they do get reviewed every 6 years. In terms of the second part of your question, Councillor Barnacle, the watercourse clearance, we inspect watercourses on a schedule. We do them every 3 months for the riskier ones, the ones that are more prone to flooding. Others at 6 months. Some we do annually, some we do every 2 years, where there's a bit of a lesser risk. So it's really based on risk assessment. And watercourse maintenance, watercourse clearance is just part of the things that we do. It's not a panacea to deal with all flood risk. It's really just aimed at trying to minimise blockages in watercourses, which you do have a heavy rainstorm might cause flooding. So it's trying to get in advance of the rainstorm to prevent that. Where we've got high water table, that is difficult. It's not really something that gets dealt with as part of watercourse maintenance. Because the high table is just there, it's difficult to deal with, it's difficult to know what it is, and unless you're taking measures such as sinking boreholes and constantly pumping groundwater, it's very difficult to deal with. So it's an area of the science that is a bit new, that we don't know a lot about yet, and there isn't a lot in the armoury yet that we can use to tackle groundwater flooding. It's just there, and we just have to try and deal with it, unfortunately. So yeah, that's not an easy one.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Barnacle, does that answer your question?
Well, I've just one supplementary point. Is it for me as a local councillor to engage with the SEPA consultation in relation to the area I'm talking about, or can PKC do that on my behalf?
We can do it either way, Councillor Barnacle. If you've got concerns, you can give them directly to us. We can happy to discuss that with SEPA. I think SEPA have the kind of national overview when it comes to local issues. That's probably more the council. So you can have a direct conversation with us. You can input your information to the national consultation once it starts in 30th of July, or we could do that for you. However you want to do it, we can arrange. It's not a problem.
Thanks very much.
Can I suggest, Councillor Barnacle, that you engage with Peter offline to try and get this bottomed out for your community?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you very much. So next question is to Councillor Ros Mccall.
Thank you, convener, and thank you for that, Peter. Thank you for the information and for the report. I guess some of my questions already been answered in your answer to Councillor Barnacle. I note that it is a proactive position that the council is trying to have in this strategy. And I'm also very aware that 6 years is the sort of time frame that SEPA has come forward. But I also am noticing and reading a lot of reports that we seem to have reached a tipping point where the climate change and the change in our weather patterns is actually making us very much wetter. And 6 years is a long period of time when you're dealing with the aftermath of water, because we know it can really travel. So I guess my question really is more of a sort of general one. Is 6 years of a rotation too long a time now for us to be acting? Should we be looking at, in general, looking at trying to reduce the amount of time that we're looking at this? And if that is the case, or if not the case, how do we make sure that we are as proactive as we can? Because climate change and weather patterns are very different now than where they were even 3 years ago, never mind 6 years ago. I hope that made sense.
Yep, no, thanks, Councillor Mccall. The 6 years is basically just enshrined in the legislation. So the cyclic process was set up under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act, and I think that's just really a review. And you've got to remember that there's other things going on during the 6-year process. So it involves the National Flood Risk Assessment, that gets updated every 6 years. 2 years after that, SEPA are meant to update their national flood maps. Now, to be fair to SEPA, they actually do that now on an ongoing basis. They don't wait for the 6-year anniversary. They're doing annual flood mapping updates. Whenever we do a flood study now and we kind of get a bit more detail on flood risk in an area, we give the maps to SEPA immediately, and they're straight into the national flood mapping. So that just happens as of course, really, throughout the 6-year period. And then, you know, we're updating 2 years after that. There's new strategies and plans get published, and we're also doing interim and final reports on this every 3 years. So there was an interim report in 2019, and next year we'll be publishing a final report which looks back on the first 6-year cycle. So I suppose in that interim and final reporting, you know, there's maybe an opportunity as a local authority to say, well, you know, is 6 years the right thing? Is it too long, too short? You know, there's a lot of work gets set out in these plans, and try to deliver it over the 6 years when we've had problems. You know, COVID for one thing, big flood events distract us. It's difficult. It's a lot of work to squeeze into that. So I feel in some ways 6 years is not long enough. But the process is, you know, it's constantly under review. And for things like climate change, if we get new data, and there was new climate change data came out a year or two back, you know, it's a matter of just feeding that into the process and just reviewing things as we go. So it's not like we set out a position 6 years and then don't deviate from that until 6 years down the line. You know, it's a constant process of reviewing and updating. The science is always getting updated. So it's just really trying to deal with that and be proactive with that as best we can as we go forward. So I wouldn't get too hung up in the 6-year thing. It's just the cyclic periodic review that's required by the legislation itself.
Yeah,
does that answer your question, Councillor Mccall?
Yes, it does. I was more concerned about the fact that the people are living with water issues whenever we have a flood incident, but the information that we're dealing from as a council is and can be at worst point. As you say, yes, I know it's updated, but at a worst point, we're probably looking at 6 years, not so much out of date, but that's the guidelines that we have. So it was more along the lines of, is that quick enough when we're looking at people having to live with water issues, is I guess my point. But you've answered that. I get the way that the structure is put up, but I understand the point being made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mccall. Just before we move on, can I welcome Councillor Gray to our meeting? I'm pleased we've been able to track him down and get his technology working to get him into the meeting. So welcome, Councillor Gray. Moving on to a question now from Councillor Donaldson, please.
Thank you, Convener. In fact, I've got 2 questions to ask, but the second I'll ask after others have asked their own questions. And that is a much broader question. The first one, though, is to ask Peter to provide an update on what's a major part of the capital spend, and that's on the Comrie scheme. To ask him what is the position on legal objections, and just as a general progress update, because I think people locally would like to know.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Donaldson. Yeah, you're right. The Comrie flood scheme is a big part of the Council's local flood risk management plans. Comrie is affected by 3 rivers in the area and has had some pretty bad flooding in the past. The scheme itself is progressing. We are now down to 1 outstanding legal objection to the scheme, which is part of the process under the Flood Act. We have to publish flood schemes and allow, you know, local people, businesses, etc., who've got concerns, they can lodge objections. There's quite a big scheme. There's a number of landowners involved, so I think we did quite well in terms of upfront consultation. At this stage, only having 1 objection. Now that objection isn't being withdrawn, so we're now heading towards a local hearing, as it's called under the Flood Act, and that's, I think, been set up on the 22nd of June. and it'll be in a similar format to what we're having right now. It'll be a kind of online Teams meeting. That'll be a public meeting. A reporter's been appointed, and we are, well, I don't think we've submitted our kind of opening statements yet, but that'll be done soon. So the report will be there. They'll review the objection and the council's position on that, and we'll get a decision on that shortly after the 22nd of June. And we're hoping that we can come to the next committee after that and get the scheme confirmed and moving forward. In the meantime, the consultant engineers are doing what they can to progress matters in terms of design work, and we're speaking to contractors to look at things around the issues around construction. So we're not sitting idly. We're trying to progress the scheme as quickly as we can. I don't unfortunately have the overall programme in front of me, but we're trying to look towards starting certainly advance works within the next year. And hopefully next year at some point will be the start of the main construction works. But I can give you more detail on that offline if need be. Hope that helps.
Could I just add, thank you very much. And also, by the way, just to state, thank you for writing to the 3 ward councillors with an update recently, and that was appreciated. I hear what you say and the advance works, and you're trying to do as much as you can while, until this objection, and it has to be heard, and clearly it's important, and you've got to follow the due process. But from what you're saying, when do you now anticipate the scheme might be completed? I suspect it will be into 2023, or do you still have some hopes that it might be end of 2022?
I don't have the programme in front of me, Councillor Donaldson. Obviously, for this committee meeting, there's so many projects, so I'll have to get back to you with the details on that. I think at 2023, but I would have to confirm what the exact dates are now. The scheme's been delayed a bit, obviously, by the statutory process that we're still undergoing, and the COVID and the flooding last year. I think we sort of said that to you in the recent update. But I can get the project team to come back and confirm what the revised timescale is. We are working on updating the website for the community to let them see what the latest position on that is.
Right, thank you very much. That's appreciate it, and that would be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Was that your second question, or do you have another one still to come?
No, I have another one, but I'll wait until the others.
That's fine. Could you pop Q back in the chat box just so I don't miss you out then?
In case you forget.
Thank you. Well, I didn't like to say that, but I just wouldn't want to miss you out. Councillor Robertson, please.
Thanks, Convener. My question was actually largely answered in response to Councillor Barnacle's question. Thank you.
Okay, that was quick. Thank you very much. Councillor Parrott is next, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think that the answer I was seeking was alluded to in Councillor Barnacle's question, but given that the designation of PVA and OTA will, I think, heavily inform any Scottish Government decisions on funding support to flood schemes, can I ask if we are entirely content that the areas within Perth and Kinross that have been designated as PVAs and OTAs cover everything where we are likely to, if you like, be seeking funding support? In other words, are we content with the judgments that have been made by SEPA in terms of the designations? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Parrott. Yeah, it does. The PVAs and OTAs and the sort of designation of those areas, it doesn't directly feed into funding. What you actually have to do is identify capital projects through doing studies, feasibility studies, and then put those forward for capital funding. And we did that during the first cycle, and we've got 4 flood schemes that we have capital grant funding allocated for, so the work that we're doing at the moment is covered. There's a bit of additional top slice grant money that gets allocated, and that funds the flood study work that we do. So in terms of the first cycle, yeah, no problem at all. And I think the committee paper sets out what we've been putting forward for the second cycle. So there's a couple of additional schemes, three additional schemes in there, and the top slice funding that funds the flood study work should continue as well. What we don't know at this stage, because it's a little bit early in the process, is what the picture is across Scotland in terms of all the schemes that are getting put forward by local authorities. and that's all subject to this public consultation. But once we get through that, SEPA will prioritise all the flood schemes across Scotland, and then those will go to the government, who will then look to allocate funding. So that's all been discussed at the moment, and there's no final decisions on that. But I think for the time being, yeah, we are funded. The capital projects that we've got have been receiving funding already, and it's really a good system now because that supports the design development work that we have to do in advance of construction, which was in the past that wasn't always the case. So it's a much better kind of supportive funding situation that we've got at the moment, and we're fine for cycle 1, as we say, and those projects are ongoing, including projects like Comrie will be ongoing for a while yet, and the government's committed to supporting those. And they've actually committed under the first cycle not to just fund in the first 6 years of those capital projects, but that programme got extended out to the first 10 years. So there's 10 years of flood risk management projects across Scotland, which the government is committed to funding.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question satisfactorily, Councillor Parrott?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question is to Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Peter.
Morning.
You are the unfortunate person who's going to get the first ever question I've done at a meeting like this. My question regarding the Medvin burn, which is down in one of the lists here. Now, I lived for quite some time beside the Lochte burn, and I took some action personally myself to try and help if there was going to be any problems there at all. Have you any way of, or are you advising anybody near the Medvin burn, giving them some advice to help themselves before anything was to happen? And the second point was, for me, second question, sorry, was that most of the surface water in Medvin appears on the road because of the layout of Medvin. A quick solution would be possibly beside the burn, would be to get the water off the road down into the burn quickly. So my question would be, is that all included in your survey?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Smith. In terms of the Medvin burn, we can advise residents in terms of the sort of self-help measures. That's one of the actions that we put into the published flood risk management plans. We do encourage landowners, riparian landowners in particular, who own a bit of the riverbank, a bit of the bed and the banks of any watercourse or burn, to try and keep it clear. Don't dump their garden waste in. There's always a good bit of advice. If they do see blockages, whether it be vegetation or the classic urban, bread baskets, shopping trolleys, old tyres, to fish them out. We do our programme of watercourse inspections, whether they be quarterly, 6 monthly, annually, whatever it might be, and we'll go in and clear watercourses and help out with that as well. But residents can contact us at any time if they're looking for advice. There's other things they can do. It doesn't just relate to clearing the watercourses. There's products that they can fit to their properties, air bricks, door guards and the like, non-return valves, and that can help make their property more resilient to flooding, as well as the advice that SEPA gives in terms of signing up to Floodline and all the good advice that we can give on that. So the team's available to help people. We've got a generic email address set up now, so there's no problem with helping people out, giving them that advice, and try to sort of work with them a bit. We do a bit and they do a bit. We tend to find with communities where we're all kind of working together like that, we can do a bit more, we can achieve a bit more, it works better. So Medvin burn, I think, is in for a flood study. So that'll involve kind of consideration of flood history and the flood mechanisms in that area, probably a bit of modelling work to get a handle on not just what the current flood risk is, but what it might be in the future, and what the more extreme flooding might look like. So that will certainly be in there. And yeah, things like looking at existing drainage systems, how they can help with that flooding mechanism. Can we shift more water off roads and into burns? There's a bit of an environmental thing in there, because SEPA sometimes say, well, if you're draining a road into a burn, is it maybe not good for water quality? So we have to look at things like that. Roads do tend to be the places where we get surface water gathering. We'll quite often find that the old drainage systems that we have don't always cope for more extreme forms of flooding, and the water does go on the road. sometimes it's better having it on the road than in the properties. So surface water management does look at trying to route water away from properties. Sometimes roads are used for that. But if we can get the water off the road as well, and into a storage area or a suds feature or a drainage system, yeah, that's always better as well. And these are all the things we look at, a long list of actions as part of flood studies. So everything's on the table, everything's considered, and where we've got a bit of local knowledge, we'll go out to the community and say, have you got, what information have you got? What do you know about flood risk? What have you observed? And have you got any ideas? So yeah, we'll factor all those things into the flood study considerations that take place.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. And thank you, Frank. Councillor Smith, in relation to the second part of your question regarding roads, I'm not sure if Stuart Dial is here, and if he is, I wondered if he wanted to comment on that or not. Maybe Stuart's not with us today. I thought he was.
Yes, I'm Councillor Forbes. I was just trying to find my unmute button.
Just wondered, Stuart, if you had any comment on Councillor Smith's second point or not.
Regarding the surface water on the road network. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We try to mitigate the effects of the surface water on the network by our gully cleaning, but obviously in severe flood events, the gullies don't take the volume of water that's coming down. But as Peter also said, that it's very often better to have the flood water on the road rather than going into properties until such time as capacity returns to the burns and the pipe systems to take the water away. So yeah, we will try and mitigate the effects of water coming from the road and flooding properties, but it's very often better to have it there than elsewhere.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. That's quite interesting. I've never thought about it that way, so thanks for that. We'll move on to Councillor Jarvis next, please.
Yes, thank you. Just looking for a bit of general information, and it's regarding, again, the PVAs and OTAs. Under 212, Dunkeld, Burnham and Lunkerty are listed as ongoing flood protection studies, and I wondered if there was a timescale for this. And then the other areas that are listed is Spitalfield, Dalguise, Bankfoot and Ammon Bank. General actions. What are general actions? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jarvis. The general actions, just deal with that quickly first, are described at 210 in the report, and they basically apply right across, effectively the whole of Scotland, I suppose, right across the council's area, and it's things like the watercourse maintenance that we do, SEPA do flood forecasting, it's the self-help actions, getting communities to do a bit of work themselves to clear burns, fit flood products to their properties, that kind of thing. So those actions apply within those PVA areas. Sometimes we don't, we haven't identified within some PVAs a particular specific action, and it's just the general actions that apply and should be enough to manage flood risk in the meantime. So I've forgotten the first part of your question. It was about studies. It was
the flood protection studies, Dunkeld, Burnham and Lunkerty.
Yeah, so Dunkeld and Burnham.
Time or a time scale.
That's ongoing at the moment. We are, what stage are we at with that? We're sort of at the stage the modelling's kind of been done, and we're identifying the potential sort of actions, the measures to try and mitigate flooding, whether it be some form of flood scheme or other action. So that's kind of been looked at the moment. We've had initial discussions with mainly SEPA and Scottish Natural Heritage and Nature Scotland now on that. And what we'll do is we'll work through all those, and then we'll come back out to the community with a bit of an update on what sort of initial findings on that. So we tend to, with these studies, have some community drop-in sessions or online meetings just to disseminate what we've found on the study and let people comment on it before we finalise it. Lunkerty is a new study for Cycle 2. It's a new action, so it won't happen. It'll be programmed to happen at some point after 2022. Does that answer your question, hopefully? There's quite a number of locations you gave there.
No, that's fine. No, I just wondered, how long the study would take and all the rest of it. So thank you very much.
Studies generally take, about a year, maybe slightly longer, just depending on how we get on with the sort of modelling process, and then trying to get the the community drop-in sessions organised, etc., and get things through. So some of them a little bit less, some more. We tend to aim for about 14 months from start to finish with a study.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jarvis. Next question, please, from Councillor Mccall. And I see it's QS. I presume that means more than one question, does it, Councillor Mccall?
It does indeed, Convener. Okay. Thank you. But they're all related. It's all on the same subject, just in different parts of the paper.
Fine.
So thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Dixon, for the report. My questions are on OTA 253, which is to do with Perth City. And the first point is on page 14. I'm just pulling it back up again here now. And it's following actually from Councillor Jarvis's question about the flood protection study at Craigieburn. When is that meant to, what was the timeline around that? But equally importantly, what is the scope of it? Because Craigieburn is quite long. And in fact, many of the residents who live along Craigieburn who were subject to quite significant flooding have concerns that the ongoing developments of properties and businesses all the way out to Broxden are a contributory factor because of the runoff that previously might have existed there. The other bit that I noticed that's not there in that whole area of 253 is around Craigie Hill, because again, in the incidents in August, there was quite a lot of runoff, significant runoff from Craigie Hill to the upper part of Craigie to the Glens and round about Moncrieff area, and that's not mentioned there at all. I'm also curious as to why Fuse Road and Cavendish Avenue are seen as one study, or at least one issue, where in fact they're quite separate geographically, and I suspect there may be different causes for the flooding there. And just generally, what is the overall plans around this? And related to that question, on page 16, you mention a consultation with residents, and you mention a number of, I think it's in section 2.25, but there's nothing there to say that you're actually going to contact people who have been subject to flooding in the past, or local residents. And that particular area, I think I've picked a good day to come to as a substitute for E&I actually, because we don't have community councils in my ward at all. And so therefore there's no easy notification through a community council to notify affected areas. So I'd be really, and quite a lot of the residents there may not necessarily buy a newspaper, or certainly the Courier specifically. They may not know to look on the website. So I'm very concerned that the consultation will not be as comprehensive as it could be. And so I'm wondering therefore why there isn't any attempt made to contact everybody that was affected by flooding, because the council did indeed hold online consultation meetings with residents at that time that were very helpful. So I think that's the question, and a lot of them won't be on Facebook or Twitter either, for that matter. And the final point relating to that is in Appendix 3, if I can just find that there, again around section 253. And yes, so you've got one classified as pluvial and one as fluvial. I had to look that up. But while I understand there's a risk of flooding from the burn, there's also a rainfall issue, which has in fact caused a lot of the flooding, the two things together. So I'm wondering why is one determined more than the other, whereas in fact there's a combination of the two that caused the belief is caused the majority of the flooding. And indeed the flooding that we experienced in the August event was really a combination of increased incidents of flooding, but perhaps more isolated and sporadic over the preceding few years. And I would agree with, I think it was Councillor Mccall who raised the point before, about 6 years being quite a long time, given that the increase in incidents in Perth City and all of the areas that are identified there. I don't know how many questions that is, Convener, but they're all related. I'm sure you'll be.
It was certainly more than I was expecting, Councillor Mccall, that's for sure. I saw Peter. I understand it's a more subject, so I saw Peter scribbling away. So let's see if he's got them all down. If he's missed a couple,
they are all related on the one subject. It's just that one answer would lead on to the other question, so I thought I'd just throw them all out there at once.
Okay. Well, let's Peter have a go at this, and we'll see how we get on. Thanks, Peter.
Let's try and remember everything. Craigieburn flood study, Councillor Mccall. Thanks for your questions. First of all, Craigieburn flood study programme. Now, the flood study has actually been broken down into the two sort of phases. And the first phase is done. So we've had the model built, the hydraulic model that we use as a basis for these studies has already been built, and it was built as part of an earlier project that we did jointly with Scottish Water called the Perth Integrated Catchment Study. And we took the opportunity, because the Perth Integrated Catchment Study covers the whole of Perth, and it goes a bit wider than that. It covers the sewer catchments as well. So when we had the consultants in building the big model that was done for that, and it was quite an exercise, we took the opportunity to add the Craigieburn into that as well. So we've already got a model. Half the study is effectively already done. What we now need to look at is running that model, getting a better handle on the actual flood risk, and then looking at the measures we need to put in place to try and manage that flood risk. And that's coming up next. So I'm at the moment working on a set of contract documents to get that out, to get a consultant engineer appointed. So we're hopeful that we can get the remainder of that study done, in 2021 and get it finished. So that's kind of ongoing in a way. The scope of the study within the published flood risk management plans that we have at the moment, and this really came from previous mapping and modelling work done by SEPA and National Flood Risk Assessment work. The focus on it was really looking at, we're always aware that there was a bit of a gap with the Craigieburn, and that we've got the Perth flood scheme there, but the scheme didn't quite do everything it needed to do in the Craigieburn. There's still obviously areas at risk of flooding. So the focus of the study was originally meant to be about Windsor Terrace area, around that area. But given what's happened in August last year, the sort of widespread flooding right through the whole Craigieburn catchment, the study will look at everything. We'll look at everything from right up at Broxden on the Scouring Burn, which runs into the Craigieburn. It'll look at Craigie Hill, the runoff. It'll consider all of that. We'll model the whole catchment right down to where the Craigieburn goes through the South Inch and the culvert, and then meets with the Tay. So everything's back on the table to look at that as well. We'll look at the flood storage ponds as part of the Perth flood scheme. We'll look at the functionality of the South Inch flood storage area as well as part of that study. So that's hopefully includes everything. Well aware development as well is a bit of a concern in the area. There's always a concern, and understandably people are always concerned that new developments creating more roofs, more driveways, more impermeable areas leads to more runoff, which increases flooding. But what we've had in place for a number of years now is that any new development has to provide, it shows part of the plan application, full measures for how it manages surface water, and that tends to be done through the SUDS thing, Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems. So any water that's generated from new development is gathered and stored and attenuated before it gets slowly released back into whatever, a receiving watercourse or a drainage system. So the overall sort of management approach for that is that any new development is effectively neutral in terms of the surface water it's generating. And it certainly shouldn't increase flood risk elsewhere either. So that's the approach that's been taken. So you will see in a lot of these new developments, even within the Craigieburn catchment, that they do have SUDS ponds typically built with them to provide that storage capacity. Next part of your question was about Fuse Road and Cavendish Avenue. They are separate areas. This came about again because of the Perth Integrated Catchment Study. Scottish Water had identified a number of areas that they were working on within Perth in terms of sewer flooding, and Fuse Road and Cavendish Avenue were two of those. So we've ended up running a joint project with Scottish Water to look at flooding in both of those areas. They are separate and distinct. There's modelling studies getting done, both of them, but they've been done at the same time. So we've just kind of grouped in, because we've grouped that project, what they were doing with Scottish Water, under one kind of banner, but they are separate issues. Yeah, we're fully aware of that, and they're working away looking at potential solutions in both those areas at the moment. Now, consultation with residents, I think you make a good point in terms of the consultation going out, and we do always try and advertise it's a national consultation as well, advertise that as widely as we can. And I think I've sort of indicated in the committee report a number of the ways we try and do that. But I do take your point. We do have, as a result of the flooding in August, quite a long list of contacts now, a number of the properties that have been affected. So, we can certainly put out some information to try and contact those people again directly to let them know there will be a national consultation online. We will do as much as we can. It'll be on the Council's Consultation Hub. It'll be on the Council's website, Facebook, Twitter, and we just try and really advertise as widely as we can. Community councils we write to as well. But if there's other ways of spreading the word about that, then absolutely happy to look at that. That's not a problem. Now my notes are not quite as good. Appendix 3 you referred to, section 253.
Yes, I was curious about the designation of fluvial and pluvial. One I believe is to do with the river, and one is to do with the rainfall.
Right.
Whereas in fact, when those two combine, why is one more predominant than the other?
No.
Because very often, for example, in the Craigie Burn and some of the areas in my ward in particular around Cavendish Avenue, it's usually when there's extensive rainfall that causes the flooding. I think the watercourse itself, when it's on, if you call it normal circumstances, doesn't generally cause flooding, seasonal or otherwise, but it's when there's weather events, yeah. As Councillor Mccall mentioned earlier, there is increasing, the climate is changing, and so there are increasing weather events, which then combined with the river then becomes a rainfall issue. So it's a mixture of two things. Yeah. So my concern would be really, if you're just looking at it from I can't remember which were down there, fluvial point of view, you might not take into account the pluvial impacts of it. If that's the right terminology to use, yeah, the right context.
We do. It's more of an integrated approach now. In years gone by, I think we was tended to just look at rivers, or we look at high rainfall in urban areas creating surface water flooding. But now we do look at both, and a good example of that is in Perth, where we've done the integrated catchment study, which looks at sewer flooding, surface water flooding in small water courses. It's looked at the combined and the integrated impacts, because these things all interact, and flooding can be really extremely complex in these areas. So even when we're doing a sort of fluvial flood study, looking at rivers, we do consider the surface water flood risk, the rainfall as well. And what you tend to find is the sort of estimation of river flows is based on rainfall records. So the whole thing is taken into account in the round. But no, we certainly don't focus on one form of flooding at the detriment of another. We do consider the overall flooding and the interactions between different forms of flooding in these studies. The 6-year thing, I think, as I said earlier on, that is just really the cyclic sort of timescale that's enshrined in the legislation. We have to update things every 6 years, but I think we've got a process running with SEPA, with Scottish Water, with other local authorities, where we are constantly sort of updating things. I do get the point that if you publish a plan 6 years ago and it's sitting on the website, we don't update that. But if you contact the team, we can give you the latest updates on whatever schemes and studies we're working on, and whatever information is coming out of those exercises at any one time. So we're constantly working on modelling and updating things, and we've got new data as we work through things. But we do need time. The projects do take time, particularly the flood schemes can take a number of years, just due to the sort of complexity and the amount of work that's involved in those. Hopefully that's answered all your questions, Catherine.
Well, it has actually. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you, convener, for your patience in this matter. Peter, I might contact you separately, because there's some sort of follow-on questions that are perhaps more detailed than merits discussion here. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Peter, and congratulations to Councillor Mccall for squeezing as many questions past me. I'm obviously losing my knack. So, but on the subject of questions, the last question at the moment is to Councillor Duff. I'm inclined to say we'll call a line under it at that point, unless someone else wants to stick a quick question in there now. Councillor Lane is next, please.
Councillor Forbes, sorry, I had a question in
that's just what I'm just coming to you. According to my list, Councillor Lane, you're after Councillor Mccall, but before Councillor Donaldson. And then we've got Councillor Duff, and I was just saying if anyone else wants to stick a question in, do it now, or we'll be drawing a line under Councillor Duff. But you are next on my list, so if you'd like to go ahead, please.
Thanks, sorry, I thought you were going to Councillor Duff as the last question, so I apologise for misunderstanding you.
I would never miss you out, Councillor Lane.
Right, thank you very much for that. I will be concise with a couple of questions, and I can get a concise answer, hopefully. I agree with a lot of what people said, and I'm going to be parochial here as well. I'm looking at the way that they classified, Spitalfield, which I'm familiar with, which I think was flooded once when half of Perthshire was flooded in 1993, and the same actions for Bankfoot, which is flooded annually and sometimes twice or three times a year. So I was wondering how we can take two completely different areas and put them in the same classification. I've spoken to people recently at Bankfoot. They're not given much hope of what to do. Basically, it's protect the substation, that's Scottish Power, Scottish electrics problem and the households that are in threat of flooding is there. There's not a lot of real hope to stop the flooding that's happening there biannually at the moment. So I was wondering if there's something else we can do to give these people assistance because they're trying to do to fight the flooding events themselves. The second point is about our response on if people are phoning in on the day of the event. If it's out of hours, our calls go to, I think, Murray or Aberdeenshire, and then they're redirected. The people answering the phone they're overrun because normally their area as well. You get no response. They don't get in touch with people, and people are left hanging on the phone for 25 minutes, which in a flooding situation isn't good enough. So I was wondering if there was any way of looking that we could bring some of that back in-house when a flood event is expected, so that the residents of Perth and Kinross can get in touch with somebody in Perth and Kinross and get an answer in less than 25 minutes and having to phone several times. And I know it's a fact because it's happened to myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lang. Bankfoot and Spitalfield, yes, well aware of the flood in Bankfoot. We did look at a flood scheme for that area a few years ago, but unfortunately that didn't prove to be feasible or viable. We have had a lot of sort of local consultation with residents and flood groups, etc. And over the sort of years following the study work that we did there was a lot of small sort of project type work trying to sort of mitigate things. So we did some small drainage schemes and made sort of various local improvements. So while there's not a sort of study or a scheme that might help there are these other actions that we put in our flood risk management plans. And we've worked with I think it was a Bankfoot flood group at one point, but we try and work with local resilience groups and flood groups to try and sort of assist the community. So that may be things like getting their own supply of flood products and sandbags, pumps, small pumps, that kind of thing. Trying to just make them a bit more resilient. All the sort of advice we give about signing up to Floodline, getting ready for flooding, trying to anticipate it, working together as a community. We sort of support a lot of that sort of resilience type work, as do Scottish Flood Forum. They're very helpful in that regard. So there are these other things that we can help out with. We continue with the watercourse maintenance aspect, obviously, right across Perth and Kinross. And SEPA provide the sort of flood warning aspects, where they're available, the sort of floodline type response. So yeah, it's difficult. Sometimes we can't always just remove the risk of flooding, and sometimes it's almost a bit a case of living with it sometimes, if we can't make it go away, or we can't make it go away quickly. So we'll have to look at things in terms of more of a resilience type approach, and that's certainly what we'll try to do in Bankfoot. Spitalfield is probably, yeah, you're probably right, probably a bit lesser in terms of actual flooding, in terms of flood records that we've had, but there's been discussions with SEPA. Now my memory might be failing me, but I think Spitalfield is one of the areas that are sort of on the list because of climate change, and going forward, the numbers of properties that will begin to become at risk will, really justify it as a PVA in future years. So SEPA felt it was good to sort of flag that at this stage. So while there may not be a big push in terms of flood risk management activity in that area, it probably will be required in the future. So I suspect that's why Spittlefield's on there. And I'll maybe hand over to Stuart Doll to answer the out-of-hours calls.
I was thinking maybe Mark Butterworth might answer that, but I wonder if Councillor Lane's satisfied with the answer to his first question before we move on to the second one. Councillor Lane, are you happy with that answer, or do you have a follow-up?
Well, I thank you very much, Convener. I'd like a follow-up. Spitalfield, there was not one house flooded in, well, there was one house flooded in Spitalfield when in '93 when the river burst its banks. If any of the other houses are flooded in Spitalfield, I'm afraid Perth will be wiped out because it's so high. I just find it I'm more concerned about Bankfoot and the fact that we advise and talking away, but and any of these small actions we are taking or have taken have had no effect. And there's many properties flooded or under threat of flood on every time you have even a small event. So that was really it. I don't see any correlation at all with Spitalfield and any other house building that would be there and increased flood, because if you know the area, and obviously I've lived there for 50 years, I know what it's like. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't really accept that there's any correlation between the two, but I'll be interested to hear what Mark Butterworth says. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Lane. Mark, are you able to pick up on Councillor Lane's second point about the out of hours? Call's been answered by, was it Aberdeenshire Councillor Morley or somewhere like that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Forbes. Yeah, Councillor Lane, just in terms of the out of hours service, you're correct that Aberdeen do provide that for the council. And we are looking at that and doing a full review as part of the report that Peter referred to at the outset. What I would say is during the midnight and 9 AM on the 12th of August, Aberdeen received 482 calls from Perth and Kinross residents, which is, as you can see, is quite a significant amount of calls. And of those calls, 215 were answered and the remainder weren't. So we will look at that. But I'd also add that on a normal day, a normal night, there's less than half a dozen calls that go into that out of hours service. So if we do look to bring it in-house, which is certainly an option, I would suggest that it would be quite expensive to have an arrangement where we would need the required number of staff to answer that level of calls. So it was a one-off. It's probably not reasonable to expect all those calls to be answered on that evening, given the event. But we'll certainly look at the options and we'll bring that back to you.
Thanks. Can I just come back on that, convener, please? Because what I actually said was, I realise there'll be a small amount of calls generally, but I said if there's a flood event expected and we're quite, we get a yellow warning or whatever, that's when we should have extra staff on. It's targeted. It was not. I mean, no suggestion that we withdraw completely, but we have some staff. Because the people of Perth and Kinross, I bet 99% of them don't know when they're phoning the Perth and Kinross out of hours team that they're actually phoning is, a different local authority hundreds of miles away. Thanks.
Councillor Forbes, can I just respond to that? Is that okay?
Of course, Mark. Yeah.
Councillor, absolutely agree. Councillor Lane, I think the difficulty we had on the 11th and 12th of August was that we didn't get any warning at all. I think the yellow warning came in about 5 minutes before it actually started to rain, and an amber warning it came in actually after the event had commenced. So the difficulty was we didn't have any warning. But you're absolutely right. We need to look at the arrangements and make sure that that's the best option, and we'll certainly do that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Let's move on if we can quickly, conscious we've been discussing this for an hour, so if we can move to Stuart. So Councillor Donaldson, followed by Councillor Duff, and we'll make Councillor Duff's question the last one. So Councillor Donaldson, please.
Thank you, convener. This is an entirely separate question, although to what I said earlier, it has, I think, in part been answered by the response given to Councillor Parrott. Nonetheless, I'd like to ask on the broader funding arrangements for flood schemes. 2.3 of the annex sets out the current position, not least the 80% of grant funding from Scottish Government for flood protection schemes. But then it sets out in 2.4, these arrangements are likely to continue for cycle 2, although it is understood that the Scottish Government, COSLA and SEPA will be reviewing them. Could I ask Peter when we might know the outcome of any such review? And I think that matters because we're going to be moving to consideration of our council's overall capital budget come, I think, late summer, autumn, and flooding is a material aspect and component of that capital budget.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Donaldson. I don't have a sort of time scale for when we'll find out. I presume that what's going to happen is we do the consultation, which will last between August and October, and that during that time the discussions that the government are having with Ctlr will progress, and that before SEPA publish their flood risk management strategies, which is currently due in December, although it's difficult to see at this point that because of SEPA cyber attack, etc., that might get delayed. But I would like to think by the time SEPA publish their strategies that there would be some sort of decision made on funding at that point. But it's subject to those discussions that Ctlr are having with the government at a national level. And I don't have any date to give you when that will be concluded, but I would like to think it would be by the time that the strategies are finalised.
But your broad belief is it's unlikely that we're going to see any material fundamental changes.
I've not heard anything to say that the arrangements shouldn't continue. I think the government are sort of looking at the number of schemes that they've had in Cycle 1, and there's even more been put forward for Cycle 2, because this process generates a lot of studies and therefore a lot of new schemes. So there's a sort of increased demand for the funding that is out there. But I think we'll have to put everything forward to across the country to show the government what's needing to be done in terms of flood risk management, and then the government has to say thereafter what sort of funding is available through the sort of Ctlr arrangements. But I've not heard anything in the meantime that makes me think that this might not continue as per the sort of process that was set up for Cycle 1.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Donaldson. And the last question to Councillor Duff, please.
Thank you, Convener. Some of the question I was going to ask, I think, has been covered in your response to Councillor Lang, but it was in relation to flood forecasting and warning. I wondered if, there was flood forecasting and warning systems covering all of the potential flood areas within Perth and Kinross. In general, sort of how much warning time would people get, and how did the public sign up to receive these warnings?
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Yeah, SEPA do actually kind of two separate things. They do a forecasting service, so they do a kind of 5-day forecast for Scotland. So every day I get a document through a PDF document sort of indicating whether there's flood risk. It's fairly general. It covers wide areas, so you don't always get very specific warning. SEPA try and give you a little bit more information where they've got it. That's distinct from actual flood warning systems that they have set up. So in many of the bigger rivers, the Tay being a good example, they've got various river gauges and they use those to give flood warning. The SEPA try and the basic standards to try and give 3 hours minimum flood warning. So where they can't give that, they tend to not consider that a flood warning service to be viable. So they don't provide it because it just doesn't give people enough time to really prepare. So it's 3 hours minimum. Obviously in the Tay, because it's such a big catchment and such a massive watercourse, there's much more warning time can be made available for the Tay. We get better forecasts than just 3 hours. But that's kind of the minimum service level that SEPA try and provide. And there's a list of flood warning services across Scotland. Obviously some of those in Perth and Kinross. They were looking at trying to expand that a little bit in Perth and Kinross, and some of those proposals are in the published plans that we've got at the moment. And if people want to get access to that, it's obviously on SEPA's website, which obviously has not been working recently, but I think it's back up and running now. But they can sign up for a service called Floodline, and there's a number they can phone, and it just gets added. And I think you get text messages to your phone if you want, or emails, or how it is it gets set up to give you flood warning for your area. So that service is quite widely advertised on SEPA's website. But if anyone's looking for that, we can give them details of how to get in touch with them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duff. Thank you for your questions, everyone. And moving this report, I just want to thank Peter and his team for the work we've done, and thank Peter specifically for taking on a very large number of questions today. So thank you very much for that. And as someone who's quite literally taking the frustration of one of our communities, at least, on the chin in the last couple of years, I know how emotive flooding can be. So I'm going to move this report and move on quickly. So can I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second, convener. But in seconding the report, I think we've all learned today that there is not one simple solution about flooding, and we can all play our part, residents and the council and SEPA. And you know, we've talked a lot about the fly tipping, but I think we could maybe think that fly tipping has sometimes been in the watercourses, which has led to some localised flooding as well. So I think we can all learn to do something to work with the council to prevent flooding. So happy to second the report.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'll open up for comments now, but if I could just ask if there are any comments to try and make them as brief as possible, given that we're an hour and 8 minutes in. So open up for comments if anyone wants to say anything. Well, either there are no comments or my chat function has broken, but I'll make an assumption that it's working and there are no comments. In that case, I'll ask if the report can be agreed, and I'll assume, unless someone says otherwise, we're all in agreement. Okay, thank you very much. That takes us on to item 5, which Councillor Baird will be taking.
Thank you very much, Convener. We now move on to item 5, active travel strategy, cycling, walking and safer routes projects. Can I invite Brian Cargill to introduce the report, please?
Thanks, Vice Convener. This report details the cycling, walking and safer street projects that were implemented in 2019-20 and also 2020-21. It also seeks approval for a list of cycling, walking and safer routes projects for 2021-22. In 2019-20, the Scottish Government awarded Perth and Kinross Council £247,000 for cycling, walking and safer streets projects. These are listed in Appendix 1. In 2020-21, the Scottish Government awarded Perth and Kinross Council £665,000 for CWSS projects, and these are listed in Appendix 2. For 2021-22, the Scottish Government changed the name of the grant to Cycling, Walking Safer Routes and has awarded Perth and Kinross Council £665,000 for Cycling, Walking Safer Routes projects this year. These are listed in Appendix 3. The drawings showing the proposed projects for 2021-22 are listed in Appendix 4. Since 2010, it has been a condition of the grant that a minimum of 36%, but preferably above 50% of the projects are cycling related. This condition has always been met and will be met again this year. Every year, the Traffic and Network team use this funding to lever in additional match funding from external partners, including Sustrans and Tartran. The intention would be to do so once again this year, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Can I now invite Councillor Ros Mccall for the first question?
Thank you, Vice Convener, and yes, thank you for that, and thank you for the reports there, Brian. I'm going to do as many people have. I'm going to go straight to my ward, and obviously the only red that was glaringly obvious was King Street and Commissioner Street and Crieff. Why is very basically the answer. What reason is there that is still not done, still to be proceeded? Is it purely COVID? I see that it's moving forward and hopefully we're going to get that done, but can we get some pressure on that? So can I have that? And also maybe a general question, if it's okay, Vice Convener, just on the fact that we've just had a sustained period of time due to COVID where we've had increased safer spaces, where we've had increased in walking routes for people. What is there happening within the council to do an analysis of that? Has it worked? Is it going to benefit? And what about the money that we've had coming in and the match funding that we've found, which was great. Thank you very much indeed for the work you're doing on getting that funding. But the cycling, walking, safer routes that we've put in place, are they working? Are they being used? And what kind of analysis are we doing to make sure that they're properly utilised and we're using the funding properly? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Two questions there. First of all, the first question about King Street, Commissioner Street. I think if you look back over the last couple of years, this has been a project that we've endeavoured to do each year. As the year progresses and if we're successful in bringing match funding, we're able to cover all the projects that we hope to do. What's happened in previous years, we haven't necessarily secured the amount of match funding that we would have hoped, and some projects haven't been delivered. The intention is this year to deliver the King Street Commissioners Street project, and one of our team is actively working on that just now, so that hopefully will be one of the first projects we'll deliver this year. Second part of the question, you're absolutely right. Last year with COVID was a huge year for us with Spaces for People projects, and it was something in the region of 1.2 million, I think, is the anticipated spend. We're actively working with a consultant called Ctlr, who are gathering a lot of information on a lot of the projects that we've delivered, albeit they're temporary projects with an 18-month expiry date. And Ctlr will provide a report that we would hope to bring back to the members to allow them to see what we've delivered, what worked, what didn't work, and we'll all learn from that.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you very much. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This is great active travel funding news, but I might, if I may, I would like to ask for an assurance from officers that Mr. Cargill and his crack team have a sufficient complement of staff and sufficient resources to realise these aspirations.
Very good question, Councillor Simpson. Brian.
Sorry, Convener. Councillor Simpson, yes, thanks for the question. It's no secret that our team is stretched to the max, but I think the team is highly motivated. It's very much focused on delivery, and I think the track record over the last couple of years, if you look at Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, and Appendix 2 in particular, whilst we were trying to deliver Spaces for People at the same time, it shows we do have a track record of delivery, and I've no reason to believe that we won't deliver once again this year.
Thank you. Councillor Barnacle.
Thanks, Vice Convener. My question for Brian, while I welcome the what's been done in Kinross and planned in Milner Thought, I noticed that in 2021 there was a general dropped curbs allowance, and I've recently made a request for a drop curb in the Crook of Devon area. That will have been made after this report was prepared, I think, but I wondered if Brian was aware of that, because it's a genuine request from a disabled person, and whether there's any facility to include that in the 2021 programme.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Barnacle. The programme that we pulled together was really a partnership working with the Centre for Inclusive Living when we carried out a number of street audits in a number of the boroughs. So the majority of the measures that are proposed will have come from that. But absolutely, we have no problem at all while we're in the area of picking up additional requests. It makes sense from the delivery point of view and from a financial point of view. So I'm sure we have that on our list of priorities. But what I'll do out with this, I'll just make sure that we do have that. I'll contact you directly, and we'll make sure we're able to deliver that as part of the programme.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Sheila Mccall.
Thank you, Vice Convener. That came in a little bit more quickly than I was ready for, but thank you. I only have one question, you'll be pleased to know, and it's in relation to the proposed programme for 21-22. And I note that the Sustrans match funding was submitted in May, which is presumably in the past couple of weeks. I'm just wondering what the timeline is for response to that funding application. In other words, when might we know if we do indeed have match funding for these projects?
Councillor Mccall, I don't know what happened there, whether I lost contact or you lost contact, but I missed the initial part of that question.
Thank you. My question was really on the proposals for 21-22, and that I note that there's match funding submissions being made to Sustrans in May of this year, which is fairly recent. I'm just wondering what the timeline would be to get feedback from that and whether or not the match funding has been secured.
the way it operates just now is we actually have an embedded officer that works in our team, so he's part funded by Sustrans and ourselves, so it's almost we'll have one foot in their camp, and he's working actively with Sustrans. In particular, they're very keen to support us with a lot of the work that's in the vicinity of schools. So whilst at this stage we can't guarantee anything, we're quietly confident that we'll be successful, but if we're not, then we have to cut our cloth accordingly and rejig some of the projects. But we haven't had an answer back from Sustrans yet. It may be a month or two before we get that answer back, and we'll focus on the projects that we can definitely deliver just now, and then regroup and hope we do get the funding that will allow us to deliver all these aspirations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Vice Convener. First, I'd like to thank Brian and his team for all the work they've done. I've always found them easy to contact, and they've been willing to go and meet communities and speak to them. So I give them great credit and thank them for that. Brian, I do see, you know, minor measures in Dunkeld. I'm sure you'll be aware, hopefully, that working with the community, something else can be done, because Dunkeld, especially as we come out of lockdown, is obviously inundated with visitors and mountain bikers and that as well, and we need to have a completely new look at it to make it safer for all the people in Dunkeld. The question I was going to ask, and I'm not actually sure if it is yourself, Brian, or Darrell, but the thing that some of the residents in general find you know, disconcerting or a little bit upsetting is we place you know, the 20-mile-an-hour VAS signs. I've got about 2 or 3 of them that have been in place for about 8-9 months, and they're still not connected up. What is the hold up there? And you know, I've been promised that they're going to be commissioned on 4 different occasions. It's never happened. Is it something out with council control, i.e. electrical hookup, or what is the problem with these? Because they're sitting there, but they're not functioning.
Yeah. I don't know the specifics, Councillor. I can only apologise if they are not operating. Certainly, it was a huge programme that we undertook, and then in the middle of it, COVID came along. So there has been a lot of delays with a number of them. Some of them are out with our control, whether it's SSE, sort of the connections that are required, or whether it's been contractor availability. Certainly during Spaces for People period, we had a lot of difficulty getting contractors to operate. And I'm happy to pick up in any specifics and ensure that these are delivered. We are now getting back to some kind of normality on the delivery side, and without knowing the locations, I'm confident these will be in working very soon. But I'm happy again. I'm happy to contact you out with this meeting to find out which ones in particular, and we'll address that.
Thank you very much, Brian. I know you will. It's Capeth and Spitalfield. That's very parochial for me.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I note with interest that, if you like, the change of name of the project from Cycling, Walking and Safer Streets to Cycling, Walking and Safer Routes last year. The new name suggests, if you like, a broader focus, whereas the previous was just urban to me. Is there actually any substantive change in the applicability of the grants under this scheme, or does the change of name simply reflect what was happening? Thank you.
Being honest, Councillor, we're unaware why they changed it from streets to routes. It's exactly the same grant, it's exactly the same criteria. And with all due respect, you know, within reason they could call it what they want if they're going to give us that level of funding. But there was no indication as to why it was changed from streets to routes. It's exactly the same. It's just packaged differently, and it has caused some issues in that there's a misunderstanding as to what the project is that we're delivering. But there's no difference as far as we're concerned.
Okay, no, I was simply interested to know whether there was any slightly different focus to it now, but I agree with you. As if they're happy to give us the money, I'm sure we are happy to use it to good effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I don't see anyone else wishing to ask a question, but this is the last call for questions. If anyone has got a question they would like to ask. Okay, I don't see anyone looking for a question. Before moving the report, I'd like to thank members for their questions and their interest in this report, and to Brian for answering the questions. But I'd also like to thank Brian and his team, who we all know worked really hard before COVID, but when COVID came along, their kind of focus had to quickly change. They were given additional funding at short notice and had to find projects to make, because we'd all changed the way we went about our business. People were walking more and cycling more, and they made the streets safer for people to walk, minding the 2 metre. It's actually quite strange where there are no markings, people still know that they have got to keep the 2 metre apart, which can only be good. So I'd really like to thank Brian and his team, who continually make such a difference to the whole community, Perth and Kinross. Maybe people don't always praise you because you're just not working hard enough, but we know that you are doing your level best to keep us all happy. So thank you very much for all you do. Happy to move the report. I got a seconder for this report.
Councillor Baird, I'm happy to second this report, and I'm afraid you stole my thunder. I also wanted to echo what you've said, and also Councillor Lane mentioned it, and that is to thank Brian and his team. And I certainly, as I'm sure many of my colleagues do, I get emails very late at night from Brian and Darrell and others in his team, sometimes 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So we know that they're working incredibly hard. And as you outlined just a minute ago, Councillor Baird, the extra money, which was very welcome, but kind of thrown at us at the last minute to work with, was, whilst welcome, it did cause some problems. So thank you to Brian and his team. And Brian, can you please take the thanks of the committee back to your team for this? I'm a huge fan of cycling and walking, as most of you will know, and actually in a tenuous way, we can perhaps link this paper to the last one when we talked about climate change, because perhaps if we all walked and cycled more, we might actually make a small difference to the climate change agenda and perhaps reduce flooding in the longer term. Thank you, Vice Convener. Happy to second.
Thank you. Any comments from members, please? Anyone wish to make a comment? Councillor Mccall, you're just agreeing with all the comments. No one else wishes to add a comment. Okay, thank you very much. I think before we move on to the next paper, we will have a 5-minute break. So we will resume. I'll give you 6 minutes and we'll be back at 11 o'clock. So you have a 5-minute comfort break. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I think that's now 1 minute past 11, so let's make a start. And this takes us on to paper number 6, which is the proposed 40-mile-an-hour speed limits in relation to the Crosstay Link Road. We've agreed to hear from Councillor Colin Stewart, and I'm hoping that someone is bringing him into the meeting, so we'll hear from him in a minute. But before we get started, can I remind everyone that this is not a debate about the Crosstay Link Road? We've had that debate and made that decision. I want to try and keep our questions and comments specifically to the papers in front of us. So can someone advise me if Councillor Stewart is now in the meeting and ready to go? Okay, I'm not hearing anything from anyone, so I'm wondering if there's a technology problem.
Convener, it looks like he's in the meeting now.
Okay, Councillor Stewart, are you with us?
Yes, thank you, Convener.
Okay, I'll let you just carry on then. You've got 5 minutes, please.
Convener and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to make representation on the paper before you today. On the 40-mile-an-hour limit for Stormontfield Road, Scoonan District Community Council has objected to the stopping up order. If that objection is sustained, then the proposed 40-mile-an-hour limit may need to be changed. So it would be better, I suggest, to wait the outcome of that than to proceed on the basis that the stopping up order will go ahead. It's also worth noting that the Community Council are actually proposing a longer 40-mile-an-hour limit stretch if the stopping up order doesn't go ahead. On the 40-mile-an-hour limit for the A94 north of Scone, again, the Community Council is proposing that the 40-mile-an-hour limit stretch isn't long enough. Perth and Ross Council says that the traffic in the report says that the traffic and network team will keep the situation under review. There has already been a plea from Provost Malloy to put a traffic island in at the entrance to the airport to help residents cross to and from the bus stop on the opposite side of the A94 from the airport because of the speed and volume of traffic. Local members were told, and I think the Provost's request was back in 2017 or 18 if I recall correctly, local members were told in response to that request that this would be considered as part of the A94 route action plan, which has been in gestation now for several years. Further, however, and I don't think this is mentioned in the paper, the Crosstay Link Road modelling data that the Council has available and has used in public presentations and briefings to elected members shows that there will be a substantial increase in traffic on the A94 north of Scone, north of the Crosstay Link Road, in the first year of opening of the Crosstay Link Road. It would be cheaper and easier to implement this extension now and thus get it right first time, rather than wait until the road opens and then have to do it anyway with the cost of further traffic regulation orders and moving the signs. In the paper, there is no financial impact listed in the annex section, but there is, of course, a financial impact of going ahead with either of these proposals and then deciding to add more things in later or extend or change the traffic regulation orders or speed limits, which would entail additional revenue cost for officer time in promoting the traffic regulation orders and in installing new signage. I suggest that it would be better to get these things right first time and therefore request that you do not set aside these objections from people and a community representative organisation with detailed and valuable local knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. That was 2 minutes 43 seconds, very concise. There's an opportunity to ask Councillor Stewart questions, and I see the first question is from Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Stewart, for sharing the views of the community and the Community Council with us today. You mentioned that there is potentially going to be a significant increase in traffic on the A94 north of Scone after the road is completed. Do you have any figures that tell us anything about precisely how much that will be? I appreciate that these things are all forecasts, but have you had any figures from the council or similar bodies? Thank you.
Yes, over the piece, a number of different figures, or certainly a range of figures, has been used. I think the largest figure was given at a presentation in Cooper Angus Town Hall prior to the Cross-Tay Link Road planning application, and that was roughly 25%. I think in more recent presentations we've seen figures of roughly sort of 12.5%. Now 12.5% may not sound a huge amount, but I think it's worth bearing in mind. And sorry, I should also say that the increase in traffic will depend on exactly where you are on the A94, how far up. But I think it's reasonable to assume that the biggest increase in traffic will be at the lowest point, the closest to the Cross-Tay Link Road, because there will be more traffic joining in the direction of Scone and Perth at that point. So 12.5% would represent a 1/8 increase in traffic flows on the Cross-Tay Link Road, but that would be in the first year of operation just. So that's a significant increase, but it's a significant increase over a relatively short period of time, and you would then have further increases in the subsequent years. I don't believe we've got very detailed modelling of what the further increases beyond year one of operation would be. The other point to note is, of course, that this is the A94 is already used as a shortcut, if you like, by traffic travelling between the northeast and the central belt, or vice versa, trying to avoid the A90 Kingsway around Dundee, putting in the Cross-Tay Link Road, linking as it will with the A9, and therefore avoiding Perth city centre, will make that an even more attractive option. So of that 12.5% increase, a lot of it will be HGV traffic, and obviously HGVs have greater momentum and longer stopping distances. So,
Councillor Stewart, can I interrupt? I'm conscious we're getting into an area where we're making speculation, and I think we've maybe moved on beyond Councillor Bailey's question, unless there's something very specific you want to get back to Councillor Bailey on. I'm kind of anxious just to take Councillor Parrott's question next, please.
Sorry, yeah, it was just then that there will be the latest figure, I think, is roughly a 1/8 increase, but a lot of that will be HGVs.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parrott, please.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Stewart, for your short, sharp representation there. In line with the representation you're making, what would you propose to be the northern limit of the 40-mile-an-hour speed area? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Parrott. I think a point just to the north of where the airport access road joins the A94, simply to slow the traffic down before it gets to the junction and gets to the point where pedestrians currently have an unprotected crossing from the airport on one side to the bus stop on the other.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm still open for any further questions for Councillor Stewart. Okay, I guess there are no more questions, so thank you, Councillor Stewart. If you could leave the meeting, we will carry on. You're welcome to watch online in the usual way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to hang on a second to allow Councillor Stewart to leave the meeting, and then I will ask Ross to introduce the report. Okay, Ross, would you like to go ahead with your introduction to the report, please, and then we'll open up for questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, convener. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So yeah, the subject of the report, as Councillor Stewart said, is these are required for the 40 mph speed limits that are associated with the Crossdale Link Road scheme. I thought it was useful if I gave you a quick update on the scheme when I'm introducing this report. So after funding being confirmed in September 2020, the Crossdale Link Road, or Ctlr as we know it, received plan approval in October 2020. The CPO for the land has now had all objections resolved and is currently awaiting an imminent decision from the Scottish Government. The procurement of the detailed design and construction contract for the scheme is currently ongoing. Award of this contract is anticipated this summer, with detailed design commencing soon after contract award. The main construction works are then currently programmed to commence in summer 2022, so next summer, and be complete by the end of 2024 or perhaps early 2025. The benefits to the Ctlr scheme are well known, and they're summarised in the report, and more details available on our project website at perthtransportfutures.co.uk. The proposed speed limit orders required for the Ctlr scheme are published in February 2021, including the 40 mph limits, which is the subject of this report. Two new sections of 40 mph speed limit are proposed. One is on the Stormotfield Road, and this is a section that's to be widened and connect to Ctlr via roundabout to the new access to Scone Palace, the racecourse and the caravan park. It's required due to anticipated increases in vehicular traffic on this section of road, increases in pedestrians and cyclists due to the Ctlr providing this new route and new infrastructure. The other proposal is on the northern section on the approach to Scone on the A94 Angus Road, which will provide a 40 mph buffer on approach to the new Ctlr roundabout junction, and it's required to slow traffic on approach to the existing 30 mph speed limit in Scone and an approach to the new roundabout there. Objections were received to both these proposed speed limits and were not withdrawn despite our responses, so these have been detailed in the report to the committee for consideration. The objections generally refer to discontent at the extent of the proposed speed limits rather than the actual speed limits themselves. And it's noted that the two objectors have referred to the other set, as Councillor Stewart alluded to, two objectors have referred to the other separate objections that they've also made to the proposed stopping up of a section of Stormotfield Road, which is south of the proposed 40 mph speed limit. And this is a separate order which is associated with the Ctlr scheme. It should be noted that this is a separate issue which isn't actually really considered with this report, although it's alluded to because of the association with the objectors. The stopping up order has been remitted to the Scottish Government for a decision as required by the relevant regulations, and more information on this is contained in the report. The report kind of outlines the reasons and recommends that the committee set aside these objections, allowing the order to be made as advertised. And I probably would just add, since Councillor Stewart's obviously raised a couple of points there, and we add there that we have liaised with our traffic network colleagues on the objection on the basis of the extension up towards the airport, but it wasn't considered appropriate for us just to hastily add that in without it being properly assessed. So what we'd agreed was our traffic and network colleagues will look at that and assess that properly, and then if need be that'll be addressed at some point in the future when it's appropriate to do so, rather than just adding it onto the Crossdale Link Road scheme, because it's out with the extent of the scheme that's been considered up until now. The transport statement that's associated with the plan application that goes in, just to make sure we're talking about the correct figures. There is an increase in traffic proposed in year of opening on the A94 north of the Ctlr, and it's the 12% figure that was alluded to earlier on. There is more detailed modelling as you go through the different scenarios, and that's all contained within the plan application, which has been publicly available for some time now, about a year and a half. That's been there, but the scenarios are modelled all the way up to 2038 with regards to the traffic modelling. It's all available there, publicly available. Yeah, so I think that's all I've got to say just now, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ross, for that introduction. Open up to questions now, and so far the only question is from Councillor Mccall.
Thank you, convener, and thank you for that, Ross. Basically, my questions are coming in straight off the back of Councillor Stewart's deputation. He's alluded, if I got all his points down correctly, he's alluded to the stopping up order, which is the decision, as we know, is for the Scottish Government. So I guess if we were to delay, can you tell me why that would be why you think this is a bad idea? Secondly, Councillor Stewart alluded to an increase in the 40-mile-an-hour range. Again, can you tell me why that's not in the proposal in the report? And he gave us some percentages as to back that up. Can you possibly clarify in your opinion as officers, if that's correct? Just so that we've got balanced information, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mccall. You've been taking lessons from Councillor Mccall and sneaking all these questions in. Ross, are you able to answer those?
My apologies,
concisely
they were coming off the back of the points made from Councillor Stewart, unfortunately. Okay. So I'm sorry that there's three there.
Okay, no I'm teasing you slightly. Ross?
I didn't manage to note all of those down, but remind me of the questions in case I forget any of them, okay? So,
sure, certainly.
With regards to why we wouldn't delay, I mean, it's laid out in the report. There was consideration given to this, was discussion about the report coming to committee. But essentially, you know, to look at it as in a high level, the section of Stormfield Road that's proposed to be stopped up is a separate issue, and it's quite an issue that's kind of to the periphery of the scheme, if you like, which isn't the scheme isn't totally intrinsic on that area stopping up. If we don't think the Scottish Government will make the decision not to stop up, but if they do, we can quite easily react to that in the future and deal with that as a concise piece of work in the future. And I've discussed that with Brian Cargill and his team, how we would look to deal with that already. So we're anticipating that decision should it come, although we hope it won't come. To go into more detail on it, the Scottish Government's decision on the stopping up order is not known, and it's not within the Council's control. So you're opening yourself up to a delay, not knowing the speed limits. And to give more context to that, the speed limits set the design speed for the road. So as I alluded to, we're about to award the contract in the summer, and the contracts for the detailed design, then the construction. So there's a year where the contractor's going to finalise the detailed design. So that's your final alignments, both horizontal and vertical, your final kind of roundabout designs, and that all hangs off what design speed you're using. So we'll be in a situation where either we need to plough ahead with the design speed that we've got just now, assuming that the decision is going to come on the speed limits anyway, but obviously then you're opening yourself up to risk and abortive work, etc. For that contract that's going to be awarded imminently in the summer. The other issues is obviously there's embargoes and developments, so anything that can potentially delay the project can delay any development that hangs off the Ctlr, which there's numerous developments. Another important point is the council is currently, as I alluded to, it's currently awaiting the decision on the CPO, and the reporter has shown a keen interest on how the council is progressing with other orders. So we've got core path orders, we've got stopping up orders, we've got speed limit orders, and what we're trying to do is demonstrate to the reporter who's working for the Scottish Government that the council is fully committed to this scheme. We're pushing forward with everything we need, all the permissions we need to get in place. So to delay a decision that's within the council's gift, I don't think sends the right signals to the reporter that we're pushing the scheme forward and we're fully committed to it. The other point to note is that these orders are made on the basis that they come into force when the cross-tail link road is constructed and when the signage is in place. So we've got a made order after this committee, should the committee decide to go ahead with to make the orders. We've got a made order, but it's only it only becomes in force if the signs are in place and the CTLR is in place. So we're not putting the horse before the cart. It's just going to sit there and it only comes into force once the scheme's in place. And as I said, you've got this other small section that's proposed to get stopped up. And yes, we will need to deal with that should we get the decision that it's not going to be stopped up. But it's really, I've sought advice from legal colleagues and spoken to Brian's team, and it's a piece of work that can be quite easily dealt with further down the line should that decision come. I hope that's answered that question.
Yes, thank you. And the increase in range, 40 mile an hour increase in range.
Well, the extent is that I'm assuming what Councillor Stewart was referring to was that the community council would like the stopping up to be the full length of Stormont Field, the 40 mile per hour to be the full length of Stormont Road, including the section that's been stopped up. So that's when I refer to that getting dealt with as a concise, piece of work. Yeah, that would be, we'd look at that, and that probably would end up being 40 mile per hour as well, should it not get stopped up. But we could deal with that with Brian's team. And given that the objectors to the speed limit at the moment are only objecting on the basis that that section is not included, so should that section be included as a small, a small discrete piece of work further in the future, we wouldn't anticipate getting any objections to it, given that the objectors are in favour of that. So it should be quite a simple process to follow in the future to resolve that. But as I alluded to earlier, it's at the periphery of the Crossdale Link Road scheme, whereas the speed limits we're talking about today in the report, both the 40s and the 50s are they're intrinsic to the scheme and the progression of the design of the scheme, whereas that is a kind of a peripheral issue that can be quite easily dealt with further down the line.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mccall. Thank you, Ross. Next question on my list is from Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question is a sort of a follow-up to the question that Councillor Ros Mccall asked. We know that the Scottish Government sometimes can take a long time to make decisions about road issues. So have you any idea what the timescale would be if this has to go to the Scottish Government for their decision?
So you're referring to the separate stopping up order decision? Yes. Well, I had a chat with legal colleagues because I anticipated getting a question like that today. They remitted it to the Scottish Government about 3 weeks ago, and they're kind of reluctant to chase them up. They don't normally chase them up until maybe a month down the line. So what their legal colleagues has agreed that it's next month. He's going to give it till next month and then chase them up. So I wouldn't be truthful if I was giving you an indicative timescale. I'm afraid that's the kind of update on it just now. We do push. There's various issues with the Crossdale Link Road with regards to the liaison with Transport Scotland. It's Transport Scotland that are dealing with it on behalf of the Scottish Government. So we do have good connections with the guys that deal with these things, and we do push them as much as we can, because as you correctly alluded to, sometimes it takes some time to make these decisions. So I would rest assured that we'll be pushing them along as quickly as we can, but unfortunately we are at the mercy of their timescales, I'm afraid. Sorry, I can't be more specific on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Next on my list is Councillor Simpson, who's assured us it's only one question. So, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. I refer to paragraph 1.2, where it mentions that these measures are being introduced to ensure the safety of pedestrians and cyclists on the Ctlr and the adjacent road networks. But I think I would ask if there are any plans to upgrade and make safe these the pavements and paths on the adjacent road network. The present A94 could best be described having a former pavement at the side of it, and I think to introduce these road safety measures when actually getting there is not safe may be an error. So can we get an assurance that that will be part of the project?
Yeah, so the A94, the section that's to be made 40 mile per hour, we are improving the path from New Mains and putting in a token crossing over the Ctlr and a widened path all the way down until it connects with the existing footway at Scone. So that's happening. There's an improved path going in there. With liaise the local community there, the people that live at New Mains, a lot of people in there got kids that want to walk down into the town, into the school. So that was welcomed. The Stormont Road 40 mile per hour, there is a proposal to widen Stormont Road, because obviously it's looking at getting traffic out of the town and more traffic using the Ctlr to get to the events and solving that historic issue we've had when there's been events on, and everything gets snarled up. So there's going to be more traffic using that. So we're also creating a footway and widening that out to make that safe and encourage people to be able to walk and cycle in to these locations, to the caravan park, to the palace. So that's all being considered. It's all laid out in the transport statement and the drawings there and the planning application. If you want to have a further look in there, or if you want to drop me a line, I can ping you out plans that show the path improvements that are in there.
Thank you, Ross. And apparently the final question to Councillor Duff, but an open invitation to anyone else who has a question to stick a Q in the chat box now. Councillor Duff, please.
Thank you, Convener. Hopefully I've got two brief questions which hopefully will elicit fairly brief answers. In relation to the proposed 40-mile-an-hour speed limits that are before us today, am I right in thinking that in relation to the decision that we would make, nothing would need to be overturned but only further extended?
Yes.
And
yes.
second, yeah, okay, thank you. I thought that was the brief answer. And secondly, is it your opinion that there's greater risk of additional cost, overall cost to the council, if we delay a decision today? Then go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I wouldn't say we've looked into it. It's a very good point, the second question, but I wouldn't say we've looked into it in comparison, because obviously we've only just heard Councillor Stewart's concerns over you know, joining up two schemes essentially, a scheme to extend the speed limit at Perth Airport with our speed limit. So on the face of it, perhaps Councillor Stewart makes a point that, you know, you're only dealing with one scheme at one time, but you know, putting a few traffic signs in the ground for a 40-mile-per-hour limit is generally not a hugely expensive scheme. However, I would say that, you know, we are dealing with a £120 million project in the Ctlr and causing delay to the stage 1 detailed design of that. You know, the stage 1 detailed design alone is going to be millions. So I would say you'd be right in a certain what you have in the second question, that I would say delaying our project for the sake of trying to combine a small traffic signing project with another. I don't think it would be proportionate, but that's only my opinion, not having considered it in great detail and only just having heard Councillor Stewart's point this morning. But you know, that's probably my opinion, just hearing that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I say that kind of backs up my own perception. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Let's make the final question now to Councillor Barnacle, please.
Thanks, Convener. Actually, although I had issues with the Crosstail Link Road route, I've never had an issue with the desirability of the project, and I'm actually have no issues with the report. My question's more general. There's a schedule in there between pages 96 to 110 of the report on the 2012 schedule of speed limits, which is extremely helpful actually in terms of what's happened in various wards. I'm just wondering, on most maps you get A and B roads mentioned, but you never get C roads or U-class roads. So is there any ward map that the roads people have that would assist in knowing exactly where these places are? Because I'm not familiar with some of these route names. That's a general question for Ross. Could that be provided? Simple as that.
Thank you. I suspect that Ross will tell you it's in the location centre in Eric, but maybe I'm wrong. I think it is there, Ross, isn't it, for anyone to see who's on the council's network? The location centre.
I think Brian, maybe we need to come in here, because I know the location centre has details of the roads network, but I'm not sure if his team have got their speed limit orders on location centre actually in there. I don't know if it's Brian still here.
Let's ask Brian.
Maybe come in on that one. It's more a general traffic and network question rather than a specific one for the Crosstail Link Road project.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Barnacle. Yeah, that was just added in at the back of this report because it's a variation to that order. So hence there's a number of locations that are not relative to the Crosstail Link Road. Ross is correct, and the convener's correct as well. You would be able to find that on location centre. I think ideally, as roads engineers, we would love to have a plan that we could print off that showed all the C and the U-class roads, but Perth and Kinross is such a vast area that the plan would be huge. If you have any specifics, we can certainly point you in the right direction, but you should be able to find that on location centre.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And Councillor Barnacle, training is available on location centre if you need it. I had it a couple of years ago. It was very useful. Okay, I think we'll make that the last question, and I'll move on to moving this report. That's a comment from Councillor Parrott. We'll come to that in just a second. I'm always very conscious that anything we discuss related to the Crosstail Link Road is going to be contentious. So I'm grateful to Councillor Stewart for bringing to us the views of the local members and the Community Council. but I'm happy, given the debate we've had over this, just to formally move the report and ask if I can have a seconder, please.
I'm happy to second the report.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now move to comments, and the first comment goes to Councillor Parrott. And can I ask if anyone else has a comment to please put C in the chat box now?
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm more than happy to, if you like, support the proposals, the recommendations that we have before us with regard to these 40-mile-an-hour speed limits. But I do think that in the interests of all road users, there is a reasonable case for looking at and considering an extension of the 40-mile-an-hour limit on the road past the airport to beyond the airport, and indeed to just beyond the junction with the minor road to Murray's Hall. So whilst I'm fully supportive of the recommendations of this paper, I would be supportive of a review of the extension of the 40-mile-an-hour limit in the interests of all road users, particularly those using public transport for accessing the airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott. I'm slightly confused. Are you proposing an amendment?
No,
or
not
am I
at all.
misunderstanding?
I'm
Right.
supporting the paper today as it stands, but in the longer term and distinct from the CTLR work, I think there's a reasonable case for looking at the further extension of the 40 miles an hour through and beyond the airport, and ask that might take place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Parrott. I saw Brian Cargill's scribbling stuff down. Can I just ask Brian if you were making a note of that, and we can perhaps discuss that in the future?
Absolutely, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor Parrott, for raising that. I think they are separate issues. As it stands just now, our professional opinion is the 40-mile-per-hour speed limit is in the right location for the CTLR. We are actively looking at the A94, and we are actively looking at the vicinity of the airfield on the back of Councillor Malloy raising the concerns with us. And we do hope to make minor physical improvements here for pedestrian movement across the A94. I think as time moves on, if there is more usage and more development, then absolutely the reduction of a speed limit on the A94 would be appropriate. But as it stands just now, we feel it is professionally the appropriate speed limit along that section of the route.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And next comment to Councillor Mccall.
Thank you, Convener. It's just a quick comment. Well, I'll try and make it quick. I'm not known for my brevity. Just very basically, one of the criticisms we have as a council is that we're very good at procrastinating on things, and things seems to take a long time. As much as I understand, we want to make sure we get things right first time. I think when we do get things right, we should act on it, and we should act on it quickly and smoothly, and try and make the process as quick and as painless as possible, because that gets us to the end goal and also minimises the disruption for our communities. So as much as I understand the points that were raised by Councillor Stewart, and I know he's good at acting, he's great at acting on behalf of the community, and he was right to bring these to us. I think it's important that we do move these projects on, so that we can move forward as an area and make the differences that we want to make. Also, with my planning hat on, it is important to see this coming forward so that we can actually make massive inroads into the development and infrastructure changes that are happening all around Perth and Kinross. We have many reports looking for more houses, and it's good that we move these forward too. So that was my only comment. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Mccall. Councillor Mccall has made a comment in the chat box. I won't read it out. It's there for anyone to read it, and I'll make a final call for anyone who wants to comment before we move on. In that case, can I ask that we agree this report, and I will make an assumption if everyone is quiet, we're all in agreement.
Agree.
Okay, thank you very much. So that takes us on to the final paper. It's very similar in content. It's on the 50-mile-an-hour speed limits, again associated to the same area. So I'll ask Ross if he wants to say anything specific about this particular paper.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I'll be quite brief on this one. As you said, it's just following on in a similar vein. So this is for the 50 mile per hour speed limits that are associated with the Cross the Link Road scheme. So the proposed speed limit order was published in February 2021. So one new 50 mph speed limit is proposed for the full length of the new CTLR. 50 mph was selected over having it as a national speed limit, which would be normal for a rural single carriageway link road, but 50 mph was selected as it's appropriate for the kind of road layout that we've ended up with, the frequency of roundabout junctions, and it also allowed us to reduce the design speed of the road when we were preparing the specimen design, and that allowed us to be more flexible through this sensitive landscape and ensure we could minimise environmental impacts, move it away from the caravan site a bit more, etc., etc. So objections were received to the proposed order and weren't withdrawn despite our responses outlining the reasons. These have been detailed in the report to the committee for consideration. The objectors are generally requesting lower speed limits where the CTLR passes to the north of Scone, and they cite reasons of pedestrian and cyclist safety, highlighting that the road passes through a future development site which will contain a school. For clarity, this is the location the CTLR passes through the development site H29 from the local development plan, which is known as Scone North, and where it also passes through the Highfield woodland. The report states that the speed limit on the CTLR will indeed need to be revised once the development occurs in this location, either side of the CTLR. However, there'll be no development or school site present when the CTLR opens, and therefore a lower speed limit at this stage would be inappropriate, considering the standards for setting speed limits. With regards to general pedestrian and cyclist safety, it was highlighted to all objectors that our view is adequate provision for both. Token crossings have been provided in suitable locations at the roundabouts in the CTLR. One in particular caters for the core path at Highfield Woods to ensure connectivity of that path. A green bridge is provided within Highfield, and that was in reaction to early public consultation on the use of Highfield woodland, so that caters for pedestrians and ecology. And then in general, there's a 3 metre wide active travel route proposed for the full length of the CTLR, which is set well back at 3 metres from the carriageway itself. So we feel that's well catered for. So the report generally gives reasons and recommends the committee set aside the objections and allow the orders to be made as advertised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ross. I'll open up for any questions for Ross, please. Councillor Simpson, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. I have a question relating to paragraph 1.4, if I may. I wonder if we might have a plain English translation of the first sentence, because I'm not sure I understand the point being made. And to the second sentence, if we can just have an idea of how a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit ensures road safety for people crossing the CTLR.
Yeah, so paragraph 1.4 states the 50 mph speed limit is required to ensure the road alignment is more flexible through the landscape and to minimise the impact on environmentally sensitive sites. So essentially what we're kind of trying to say there is what I alluded to in my introduction, was that the standard for this, when you first look at it, is a rural link road with no frontage development. Generally, these would be national speed limit throughout Perth and Kinross. But early on, we obviously identified that this is a significantly sensitive site going through the garden design landscape of Scone Palace. There's Roman forts, historical sites. There's a lot of trees in there that you want to preserve. There's local sites sensitive to noise, for example, the caravan park. So what we did, what the designer recommended and we bought into, was working to a design speed of 80 km/h, which is a 50-mile-per-hour speed limit. And that allows us to be more flexible and push the road, like say, further away from the caravan park, like I alluded to, keep it further away from the environmentally sensitive sites, because it gives you a bit more flexibility in your horizontal alignment for the road, so you can actually make it move a bit more, for want of a better expression, allow it to kind of snake a bit more through the landscape and get a bit more flexibility. There was numerous trees we were able to make sure didn't go as a result of the road, and like I said, keep it further away from some noise sensitive sites, etc. So hopefully that explains that for you, Councillor Simpson. And the 50 mph speed limit ensures road safety for all road users. Obviously, we're a reduced speed limit rather than using national speed limit. And the roads have all been designed, as I said, to the 80 km/h design speed. So it ensures it's safe for use, for forward visibility, for vertical alignment and horizontal alignment, etc. So it's really to do with the road standards that are used and design, making sure it's safe for use. Is that sufficient?
Thank you, Ross. I can see a nod from Councillor Simpson. We'll assume that he's content with that answer. Thank you. Okay, final call for anyone who wants to ask Ross a question on this before we move on. Okay, in that case, then I think, given the debate we've had over this in the previous paper, I'll just formally move this paper and ask if I can have a seconder, please.
Yes, I'm happy to second the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Open up for comments if anyone would like to comment. Councillor Simpson, please.
Thank you very much, convener. I have no comment as such. I should just like my dissent to be noted to this decision.
I'm sure we can make that happen. Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson. Are there any further comments on what we've just discussed? In that case, then I'll ask if we can agree the report in the usual way by saying nothing. Perfect.
Agreed.
I'm assuming that's agreed. Thank you very much, everyone. So that brings the meeting to a close. Thank you all for your attendance, for your questions. Thanks to the officers for their time in answering all questions. And we'll see you at the next meeting. And you never know, we might be in some kind of in the same room together meeting rather than all staring at a screen. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance. And I wish you a good day for the rest of the day.